Your dialogue lines need to weave in and out of that, and then your big moments and your sound design. So you're creating your own scaffolding on the timeline as you're working, which is, anywhere from a single whoosh or hit to 15 layers of, who knows what. Hey, I'm Chris, lead trainer at Film Editing Pro. And today we're going to be talking about me, I guess, sort of. But more specifically, we're going to be talking about my career and all careers in Hollywood cutting trailers. A while back, I was interviewed by Zach Arnold on the Optimize Yourself podcast. And we had a chance to talk all about the life of a professional editor, day-to-day challenges at work and at home. And then, of course, we also got a bit into detail on what goes into cutting a great trailer or really any sort of short form piece. If you do enjoy this and you want to see more, let us know in the comments, because we have a part 2 where I'm going to be talking a lot more about the business side of editing. I'm going to be talking about how Film Editing Pro is formed, and then general business advice and suggestions for any editor or creative person that wants to start their own business. And of course, this will all be based on what I've learned over the years. All right, without further ado, please enjoy.
I am here today with Chris MacDonald, who is an experienced veteran trailer editor. He's worked at Universal Pictures. You've also worked with other major studios such as Sony, Disney, Paramount. You've worked at trailer houses such as Motion and Aspect. And you were also the co-founder of the online editing school, Film Editing Pro. And Chris, this has been a long time coming, this conversation between you and me, because we have lived in very, very similar worlds over the last 15 plus years. How our paths have not crossed until today, I don't know, but I'm going to rectify that problem. As of right now, I am super excited for this conversation today.
Yeah, I am too, 100%. This has been a long time coming. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you too. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. And just for the people that are listening today, I want them to know that there are a couple of different directions this conversation may go, and who knows, we might go in a completely third different tangential direction that's just as fun. But for those that are interested in the craft of trailer editing, short form, this is something that I not consciously but unconsciously have underrepresented in the guests that I've had on the show and the stories that I've told, which is ironic given the first 8 to 10 years of my career was mostly trailers and short form, which most people don't even know. But then also I want to speak to those that are of the entrepreneur mindset, that have ideas and ways they want to bring value to the world, because it's not as easy as putting up a website and doing some training videos and having a YouTube channel. And I'm sure you and I can talk about all the craziness that comes with trying to provide a service while also making a living as a craftsperson. But where I really want to get started, because you're kind of a man of mystery and there's not a whole lot about you available online. Tell us a little bit more about how you originally got into the world of editing short form and trailers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually going to a liberal arts college in Virginia, and I was studying painting and drawing because my focus at the time, I wanted to do 3D animation. So I had done that since I was like 15 years old. I did some freelance work with some people I had met online, and it was really in its infancy at the time. So it was easy to be one of the better 3D artists because at that point, all the artists hadn't started doing it. It was just the tech nerds. Anyway, but I was going to college for that. And then I had a scholarship there, which put me in touch with some of the good people from the alumni department. And one of them happened to be a VP at Universal. So I had an unnaturally easy in as far as getting kind of a foot in the door. That said, it still took me probably 9 to 10 emails of pestering him to actually have him out to kind of even consider being an intern. So I went out there. I actually, at the time, I interviewed at Disney for 3D animation, and then I interviewed at Universal with him to be an intern, which could have gone a graphical route because his department was mostly trailers, or it could go an editing route. And I had done some editing in the past just for fun, mostly editing my own 3D animations into kind of little things and playing with a little bit of music and sound design and stuff like that, but nothing at all. I think most people by that point in their lives had probably done more editing than I had, but it seemed really cool. And I really enjoyed working with the sound. And I was like seeing kind of what these editors were doing, and their timelines looked insane. And I wanted to know how you got to that point. So I was like, all right, let's try that. And then fast forward like 15 years and I was still doing it. But I followed the same progression that a lot of people do. I started out at the time in the tape room. So I was an intern / like kind of IO guy. So we would make duplications of like 3/4 tapes and digibetas. And then kind of towards the end of that, everybody was transitioning to digital. And then I became an assistant editor, did a lot of work in editing on the side to kind of show producers and try to get my feet into the creative aspects of things. And that worked. So then junior editor started cutting trailers. And then as most editors do, I kind of bounced around between a couple shops after my experience at Universal because, we can talk about this more, but that's definitely a good way to increase your salary quickly because it's very hard to move up fast in one place. But yeah. And then Filmmaking Pro was born out of that.
I always know that I can date somebody relatively quickly based on their journey when they start talking about 3/4 tapes and digibetas. You and I could probably swap horror stories of peeling labels and using the bulk eraser and the magnet and all the things that we do as interns and assistants. And then you talk to the younger generation and they're like, 3/4 inch. I don't understand. I don't get it. What does that mean?
Yeah.
So I know that we're of a similar generation and we have similar intern horror stories.
Yeah, it's funny too, because like I just turned 40 in February and I didn't feel old. But recently I've had to tell people about 3/4 and digibetas and stuff like that. Literally talking to some of our students as far as what a kind of an intern level position is going to do. And I was like, let me think about what you're going to do because you're not going to do what I did. And then I realized how old I felt because nobody even knew what I was talking about either. Yeah.
Well, we're definitely going to talk in depth about Film Editing Pro. That time will absolutely come very, very soon. But one thing I'm curious about, just to dig right in immediately, you said that you started wanting to do the visual arts, 3D animation, painting, etc. Mm-hmm. And then fast forward 15 years, and here I am still working on trailers.
Yeah.
Is there still a part of you that wishes you had gone a different route and climbed a different ladder? Or did you really find your thing and decide, you know what, it actually is trailers?
Well, I'm interested in a lot of different things. I think I could have gone many routes and been just as happy with it. And it's funny how life goes. I mean, I'm sure you've had similar experiences. You're like, I never really thought that if you look back, you'd never know that these particular dominoes would have led you to where you ended up. But they were absolutely essential to get where you are. And if you're happy where you are, then that was the perfect path to take. So currently I'm happy where I am. So I don't wish I could redo anything. Even earlier than maybe even 5-6 years ago when I was still editing full time, I was kind of still happy I was editing because trailers are, and they still remain to be, a pretty niche skill. Most people don't even realize that trailer editors are different from feature editors. A lot of people think that whoever cut the movie probably cuts the trailer, and it couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, maybe sometimes, but ideally, no. And I, just not to speak down about the 3D community, but like that blew up with the advent of a lot more digital animated films and stuff. And so on many levels, that job got a lot more commoditized, I think, than trailers did. And that pushed salaries down. It increased long work hours. So, of course, as editors, we have long work hours too. But yeah, I think trailers are still a really cool thing that it's fun to be a part of something that's a little bit behind the scenes that nobody knows about.
Yeah, I agree. One of the most common questions that I've gotten from anyone that's interviewed me that's done more in-depth research than, oh, you're the guy that worked on Cobra Kai. And they actually see the breadth of my experience. They see that I've done trailers, I've done commercials, I've done promos, I've done behind the scenes, I've done HBO first looks. I've kind of covered the gamut. And they always ask me, well, what's your favorite thing? And I said, if I could choose to do anything as an art form and not worry about the business or anything else, trailers were my favorite. Because trailers are they're this empty canvas and you can take anything and turn it into anything else. Yeah. So what I always tell people is that my favorite thing to do as a career was editing version 1 of a trailer. My least favorite thing to ever do on the planet is versions 2 through 71.
Yeah.
Which is why I made the transition to long form. So I want to talk both about the business of trailers and the art form of trailers, because like you said, there's a big difference between long form and short form. And while I don't believe that you can only do one thing, like the industry says, oh, you're just a short form editor, you're just a long form editor, I don't believe in that pigeonholing. But the flip side of that is editors that say, I'm a storyteller and I can cut anything. I don't agree with that either. So let's talk specifically about the language of cutting short form and cutting trailers.
Yeah, it's an important distinction. So just talking about the first thing you said about how it's fun, 100% agreed. Because, yeah, I mean, with something that's scripted, and you've got the director, and it's his or her baby, and it needs to go a certain way. It needs to meet his vision, her vision, the vision of all the investors in the project. You're going to have some latitude and some creative abilities, but with trailers, it's kind of like, I mean, your only limitations are what shots and lines do you have to work with from the film. I mean, you have to stay somewhat true to it. Everybody likes to say, well, trailers, they just make things up. That never even happened. And occasionally, you'll have a comedy trailer, especially where you'll have lines juxtaposed, like somebody says, "Hey, that's a great question," and but it's responding to something that happens 30 minutes later in the movie. But what I think, as long as it's true to the style of the film, it's not too big of a deal. But yeah, trailers really let you do a lot of cool stuff, and I think my favorite part about cutting them was the sound work. And I'm a guy that cannot dance. I rarely listen. I mean, I listen to music, but I listen to like instrumental stuff. Like you couldn't, I mean, it's a joke with my friends. I know nothing about sports or music, but like I can edit with music and I like listening to nice music. So that was actually a real challenge for me, is the rhythm of a trailer and staying, because I mean, like, especially if you're cutting, I hate to use the phrase cutting to a music cue because that's really reductive. But if a cue is laying essentially a tempo out, you have to kind of adhere to that to some extent. That doesn't mean you put a cut on every single major beat of the music, but it does mean that, somebody's going to kind of be getting into a rhythm as they're watching, and your dialogue lines need to weave in and out of that. And then your big moments and your sound design and stuff like that, which is, anywhere from a single whoosh or hit to 15 layers of, who knows what, that needs to happen at key points. So you're creating your own scaffolding on the timeline as you're working. And I've often likened trailer editing to doing a Sudoku. I don't know how you say that. The more numbers you get, the easier the puzzle becomes and the faster you can complete it. But at the beginning, you're like, well, I don't know where to start. And that's often how people are with trailers. Just on that note, like something that I'll often give as advice for people when they're first starting any trailer cut is, a lot of your ideas are going to come as you're often not as you're watching the film, but more like when you're doing your breakdown and you're going through the dialogue. And the way most trailer editors do it, you'll watch the movie. If you have time, you'll watch it a second time. And you may take some notes like, oh, big moment, towards the end, I got to include this guy doing this thing and this kiss between these two people. But then you really just do type out every single line of the movie. You type the name of the character, space, hyphen, space, what did they say? And you do that. It takes 8 to 10 hours. It's forever. But as you're doing that, you're getting ideas and you're getting really intimately familiar with exactly how the story flows, what people say. And you're thinking, oh, this moment up here, that would be a great setup for this huge set piece of action that occurs way later. And with trailers, you could do that. It doesn't matter. Put that stuff at the beginning. But yeah, a lot of times people will just start with whatever inspires them when they're cutting a trailer. It's like, oh, I have a really cool idea for a montage at the back. Well, start with that. Edit that, stick it in another timeline. We call them constructs a lot. We'll have timelines that are just like dialogue exchanges or cool moments or action thingies that we've cut together. And you'll have this kind of favorites bin that you've created full of interesting pre-edited stuff that you've done. And the more of those that you get, the more that it starts to look like a trailer when you put it on one single timeline.
Yeah, I've always said that when I was in the trailer world, that a trailer editor is really only as good as their breakdown. Because if you're not good at breaking it down, and I'm sure you've seen this many, many more times than I have, but even I think I was in trailers for 5, 6, 7 years, jumping back and forth between houses. And there's nothing more frustrating than when you're brought into the middle of a project and you get somebody's quote unquote breakdown, and it's basically the master file of the feature with 12 red random locators. And you're like, no, where's the bin with the breakdown? They're like, oh, that's it. Those are my moments. I'm like, are you kidding me? I would take 10, 12 hours. I would watch the whole film 3 times. Once, just me on the couch watching it because I'm the audience member. 2, breaking it down scene by scene by scene, markers for every single one on the frame. 3rd one, looks, head turns, locations, scopy shots, right? So in that process, for example, somebody would say, well, I have my assistant do that. That's when I'm writing. That's what I'm internalizing the moments. And the creative process requires you to take all of this randomness and turn it into some cohesive sense of order. And that to me is a very specific skill that when you're in long form, you don't necessarily develop. And I found that so many of my problem solving skills as an editor came from having to solve story issues in trailers that then transferred to long form. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that people have asked me many times, and I'm sure you get it as well from those that aren't familiar with the industry, just to go backwards for a second before we get back into the weeds, does this mean we actually get to watch the whole movie, or do they just tell you what parts to use? I'm sure you hear that all the time.
Yeah, I do hear it all the time. And I was initially very confused by the question because it seemed like the answer was so obvious because you have to watch the whole movie. But I guess if you're being realistic, if you get on a trailer really, really early, the movie, you might not actually watch the whole movie because it's probably not fully shot yet. So you might be watching some watered down, weird version that has slugs up that say, Batman, defeats Superman. You're like, oh, well, I'd like to see that part, but it's not available to watch yet. But you watch it pretty early. But, especially with VFX heavy movies, it's really difficult to edit anything, especially a trailer that's supposed to be so attention grabbing and whatnot, when you're working with either animatics or a storyboard. Like you might be like, a lot of times it's just a storyboard frame that's up in the rough cut. And you have to somehow at an early stage sell that moment's going to work. And that's where sound really kind of carries a lot of weight. But yeah, another big gripe I hear with trailers, of course, and I'm sure you've heard this too, is that, trailers spoil the films, which I guess so sometimes. I mean, like if the film is based on a well-known something, if it's a superhero thing or if it's a book, and then it reveal. Well, first of all, if you read the book, you know what happens. But a lot of times, my thoughts on that were, well, you can probably guess what's going to mostly happen. Like usually the good guy is going to beat the bad guy, or, the couple's going to get together. I mean, unless it's a crazy movie like, Memento or something weird or some sort of thriller. But with movies where the ending is really kind of unpredictable, editors and the producers and the studio execs are typically quite careful to not reveal that. So I don't know. I always kind of laugh when people say that, especially we see that a lot in Facebook comments and stuff like that. Oh, trailers suck. They just reveal that, they spoil the ending. And I'm like, no, man, with a movie like that, it's the journey. That's the fun part. Like, unless if you're just waiting to see what happens at the end, I mean, you're oversimplifying this process. Enjoy everything and the spectacle that's being laid out for you in the movie.
Yeah. And I also think what happens a lot is people don't really understand the many layers of politics that go into those decisions. I've had more than one occurrence. I'm sure this has happened to you, but the very first trailer I ever cut, this is literally over 20 years ago now, which breaks my heart. But over 20 years ago, the very first trailer that I cut ended up winning the Golden Fleece Award for the Golden Trailers, won the Golden Fleece. And I was at the gym of all places, just chit-chatting with this guy that I'd kind of just become like gym friendly with, like, hey, what's up? How you doing? And he had said to me, what do you do for a living? I'm like, oh, I'm a trailer editor. Oh, cool. Give me an example of some movies that you've worked on. And I gave him the name of a movie, and instantly his face changed and he got angry. He's like, you owe me $10 because that movie sucked. And I went to go see that movie because of your trailer. I'm like, it's my job to make it look good. But there's also so many cooks in the kitchen when it comes to show this moment, not show this moment. And I'm sure you've done many a trailer where the finished version goes into theaters and you're just like, oh, I can't believe they told me to use this moment.
Yeah.
Right. It's very complicated.
It's uncommon too, because that like a Golden Fleece type of concept. So if anybody that's not familiar, Golden Fleece Award is the award that gets given to the trailer that looks the best for the worst movie.
Best trailer for the worst movie. That's the name of the award.
Yeah, which is such a compliment if you get that award, because that's a really hard job. But like, if you have a movie that's that bad, your budget for marketing probably isn't that high. So it's not going to be too common unless you just kind of get a diamond in the rough, which it sounds like you were in that circumstance, where the editor that you can afford to hire for that is going to knock it out of the park for the trailer. Typically, you're going to kind of have an equally bad trailer. But that worked out for them, I suppose, in the box office, huh?
Yeah, it certainly did, and I think that it's really interesting you bring up this point because I think this has a lot to do with really taking opportunities when you have them. Because I know that you've done the same as far as like starting off as an intern, being a runner, climbing your way up, and taking those opportunities. But the reason I was handed that movie is because nobody else at that company was willing to cut the trailer, and I had just started making the transition from assistant editor to editor, and they're like, "Hey, do you want to take a crack at it?" Yes. Give me the movie. Like I took it with a full head of steam and then ended up getting the golden fleece for it, which looking back was just insane. But I was so young and new at the time, I didn't realize what an anomaly that was.
Yeah.
But what I discovered, and I want to learn more about this from your perspective, because I never went fully down the road of embracing the career path as a trailer editor, and I bailed relatively quickly because I knew I wanted to do long form, especially as I was working on movies that were getting bigger in budgets and we were getting earlier assemblies. I was way more interested in watching the assemblies and comparing them to the later cuts that they were giving us than actually cutting the trailer. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to be in the room doing that. But one of the things that I found happening as I climbed the ladder, and it's a joke that I would tell to many that wouldn't understand it, and I think you would. I stopped using an NLE to edit my trailer as much as using Microsoft Excel spreadsheets and quadrants. And I said, I don't want to edit my trailers with Microsoft Excel. What does that mean to somebody that isn't on the inside, that doesn't get where I'm coming from?
Well, if I fully understand what you're saying, you're referring to the paper cut process, right?
I'm referring not only to the paper cut process, but to the testing process, the studio notes process, and them saying, according to our quadrants and the people that have watched this, based on the people with clipboards at the mall, we think version A of this trailer should be Franken trailer to get version B. And I was just like, like I said, I love version 1. I hated versions 2 through 78.
That's an awful conversation. That's the worst time to be a trailer editor, is when you're being forced to put together pieces based on arbitrary testing results. Because I think, so a lot of times what'll happen is with trailers, there's almost always, there's more than one person cutting the trailer. And the bigger the movie, the more people cut the trailer. And obviously some movies have more than one trailer. They'll have the teaser, then they'll have trailer 1, trailer 2, trailer 3. But I'm talking about just one trailer. Like it's the trailer 1, the major trailer. It might be out with 10 different editors at 4 different shops. And so, well, first of all, you know that your chances are 1 in 10 of it finishing, and not even, because, an executive will probably on a big movie have enough budget to scrap all of them, fire all the shops. I mean, everybody gets paid, but then start over with a fresh perspective someplace else. That can happen, especially depending on how tensions are. But towards the end of that process, when you've got a couple cuts that everybody's really resonating with internally, the editor, the producers at the shop cutting, as well as the studio themselves, everybody's pretty burnt out and jaded, and it's kind of hard to see through your own experience of the cut. You can't look past what you've already seen, what you know. The jokes aren't funny to you anymore. The action moments don't matter. You're not scared. So people send them out to testing audiences. And, that I don't know if that's changed recently as far as how they get the people for that, but it used to be that there'd literally be somebody out with a clipboard in front of the movie theater saying, hey, you want free movie tickets to such and such, just come and watch these 4 trailers. And they'd gather together, as much of a diverse demographic pool as they can, old, young, every shape, size, and color, and they get them into a room, show them a trailer, and then they'd say, did you like this part? Did you feel like this actor and this actress felt genuinely, connected here? How do you feel about the ending? Were you excited to see the movie? Were you disappointed? Did you feel like it was ruined? And some of the questions can be very helpful, but typically what goes out the window with something like that is context. So if you're saying, what did you think about this moment? Well, maybe whoever trailer it was had it set up with 3 things that made that moment non sequitur. It didn't make sense at that point. Or maybe the music wasn't cut well at that moment, so it didn't play as strongly as it could. It doesn't mean that the moment's bad. It doesn't mean that joke's not funny or that action set piece isn't cool. It just means that it didn't work in that location of that trailer with that music under those circumstances. Or the person that said they didn't like it was just having a bad day. Who knows? But then you get those notes and, testing results come in and everybody knows their trailers are just going to be ripped apart, more than likely. It's less common that, everybody in testing loved your stuff. Usually it's like, well, we should also try another music cue, which is like the worst note that you can get. because everything's cut to the music in a trailer.
Oh, is it? Is that hard to just swap out a music cue real fast? Is that
just swap it out? Yeah. I mean, that's excruciating, especially if the music has a different tempo from what the cue was already there. A lot of times, just going off on a major tangent with music alts and stuff like that, when you want to try a different feel, if it's just the style of the cue that somebody doesn't like, I would always search on a library for something of a similar BPM or identical BPM so that I knew at least my moments were going to land exactly in sync, and I could just drop the new music in and see how it felt. But you don't always get that luxury. But yeah, testing is rough. Yeah.
That was always one of my favorite notes from studios when you feel like you're ready to finish. This is great. We're ready to lock. Just swap out that end music cue and we're good to go. Like, really?
Only. Yeah.
Only. It's just one note. One simple note, and then we'll lock. And then they see like, oh, well, now it opens up a whole can of worms. Yeah, for me, my breaking point, and I won't say the name of the film, but anybody that actually, I'm not even sure anybody would be able to do the research to answer this, but I'm not going to name the film. But I went through and I don't remember the exact number. It was in the 30s, number 30 some versions of a full theatrical trailer. And it was small enough and independent enough that they weren't double or triple vending. So we knew we were the one that was going to finish, but it went for about 8 months. And the studio executive we had done 3 completely different directions. So 3 trailers from the ground up. In total, it was about 37 some versions. And then they sent it to the filmmaker, creator, whoever it was going to make the final decision. And they said, I really like this one. Because they didn't like the current bud. Well, show me some of the others. Version 2. We locked as is version 2 with no changes. And that was when I was like, I'm out. Like, I just can't, because you spend all day, every day living with one movie. Yeah. And it's not like you get to, like, for me, spending 6, 8, 12 weeks with one episode of a TV series, that's tough. You get tired of it. Spending a year with one 2.5 minute piece, you lose your mind. And then for somebody to say, all these changes we gave you, just go back to version 2. I was like, yeah, this is not for me.
At least it finished.
It did finish. Like, I look online to this day and there it is, but just, so many memories of the process being so miserable.
Yeah. Yeah. That is another tough part about trailers is that, speaking of the double, triple, quadruple vending, or even having 3 guys or girls at your own shop cutting on it, you don't stand a very high chance of your thing making it out the door. So you do have to kind of, like, in long form, I don't think that ever happens, does it? You cut it.
I did. Either your work is going to show, or they've scrapped the project and nobody's ever going to see it, right? So if you worked on the new Batgirl, well, yeah, then nobody's going to see your cuts. Right. But there's no such thing as double vending in the long form world because they don't have that kind of money or time.
Right. And that's the tough part about trailers because, you could have worked on all that thing and the filmmaker could have been like, I don't like any of these, and this guy sucks, so let's get somebody else. And then you have nothing to show for it. And because of confidentiality, you probably can't even, you can't put it on your reel.
Nope.
So it's like you didn't exist for 10 months, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's very, very challenging. Yeah. And the reason that I wanted to bring that up and kind of lead the conversation with it is that I'm always a big believer in not allowing there to be any secrets and just kind of, here's the unvarnished truth about this sector of the industry or this or that. But for those that haven't disconnected, that are still listening to our conversation, that are like, screw trailers, I want to talk about the fun stuff. I want to talk about the craft. Because again, like we started, I think there's nothing more fun as an editor than editing a trailer. But it is a really challenging and difficult craft to learn. And not only have you learned how to, I don't like to use the word master the craft, but you've gotten to a very high level with your craft as a trailer editor, but you've also taken on the near impossible task of teaching it. So before we talk about the process of teaching it and building a business around it, I just want to talk about the actual craft a little bit. If I'm somebody that wants to be a trailer editor, and I'm listening to this, I aspire to it. I do my own trailer edits. I can now rip a movie off of YouTube or whatever, and I can make my own spec versions. What's the difference between a perfectly adequate trailer editor and one that just really gets it?
That's a tough question. There's not much different, because if you're working as a trailer editor, let's say 100% is the best trailer editor that ever existed and you're nailing everything, most, to even stay employed, you need to be operating at 85 to 90%. So like I understand not wanting to use the word mastering, but like getting really, really good at anything. The difference between somebody that consistently does a great job and wins, and everybody likes their stuff, it's like gold and silver at the Olympics. I mean, it's marginal. It's by a hair. But I would say that, um, gosh, I would say that the ability to take some of the defeat that happens and take it as a challenge or a bad movie, or even silly stuff, like even you want to include these whatever number of moments, but you're not really able to fit it in 2.5 minutes. At taking any of those challenges and viewing it as the fun puzzle that it is, and being enthusiastic to figure out a way to cut something a different way, to fit something that doesn't seem like it should fit, to present it in a light that makes it interesting and not boring. And being able to do that every day, well, or most days, not every day, but, relatively consistently, I think that makes the difference because, in any job, people get burned out. And, like, I think the most effort any trailer editor might ever put in is probably when they're first starting out, because every single thing, nothing's second nature yet. Every single thing's hard. Motivation is sky high. So it's a labor of love. As you get better, it's very easy to get complacent with anything that you do because you're still going to be putting out 85, 90% quality stuff. It's better than most people could ever hope to do. But, it doesn't mean it's good enough. It's not going to beat the 7 people around you that are at that same level. So it's just going that little extra bit, trying the second or third music cue to see, oh, all right, I'm really glad I tried that. And you know what's funny is like, that's where in the trailer industry, I quickly learned how valuable producers were. And, the term producer is thrown around and it means a lot of different things. It can mean somebody that's funding something. It can mean somebody that's actually hands-on. In the trailer world, the producer is one of their roles is the liaison between the client and the editor. And I initially thought I was like, well, this is a waste of a time job. Like nobody needs to be paying this person. I can just talk to the client. Why wouldn't I just do that? Well, for a lot of reasons. When you were there till 3 a.m. and the next morning you come in and the client has notes, maybe you wouldn't be as chipper to talk to the client, which needs to be the case. But also the producer has no skin in the game. So maybe if you're like, oh, I don't know, I've tried everything, this just isn't working. It's no sweat off the producer's back to say, well, why don't you let's try this new music. Or what if we rearranged how we presented this information? Because if you had this thing first, then this thing's going to seem way cooler when it happens. And you might be like, I guess all right, fine, I'll try it. Come back in 3 hours. And then it works great. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's the best thing I've ever cut. And everybody loves it. And now everybody's like in the campaign, it's like, you have to cut it in that order. And this is now it's the new archetype for how we deal with this moment. You have to cut it just like Joe Blow did. So I think the producers are very valuable in that regard, and becoming an editor that can self-produce and then is willing to give yourself unbiased, objective notes and look at your own work without the lens of, oh, but I'm going to have to be the one to do that if I decide that's what should be done. That's a real challenge. And I think that's a sign of maturity and professionalism, probably with anything that you do, is being willing to be your own harshest critic and then deal with it and make it happen through the skills that you've acquired over time.
Yeah, I think that's a really great observation. And just to dig into it a little bit deeper, one of the biggest mistakes that I've made multiple times throughout my career, but probably the most so in my trailer editing career, just because I was younger in that portion, is thinking that when I would cut something, here is the trailer. It's like, no. That's a trailer. We're not at the fact that this is the trailer yet. And in the world of scripted, like you said, I have a script, I have characters, I have a story. There are certainly a lot of things that I can maneuver around, structure of scenes, taking out lines of dialogue. I can choose different songs for a montage, but essentially the story is the story. With a trailer, it can be anything, and you're convinced, no. Oh, I've seen the movie 3 times. I know better than anybody. This is the story we need to tell, and this is the trailer. And you can always tell the less experienced from the more experienced and their inability to let go of those ideas. And I'm just as guilty as anybody else. And I'm sure you see this all the time.
Yeah, it's very hard. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of parallels to how, like, let's say the structure of a film. I mean, the idea of a cold open, that works well in a lot of contexts. movie that grabs you initially with something really neat and then says, 20 years earlier, and then it starts telling you the story. That's a little cheesy, but like that aspect of grabbing somebody's attention, that works longer and it also works shorter. And then after that, yeah, I think thinking clearly is also, I mean, especially like even with long form, like I would find long form challenging to do at a high level at this point. Well, maybe not at this point, but like if you're cutting trailers on a regular basis, or if you're cutting long form on a regular basis, it's hard to go between the two because your internal metronome is just set to one or the other. And so like if you have a longer format editor cutting a trailer, the trailer is going to feel a little bit slow. It's not going to be able to get around the movie quite as easily, and you're not going to take as many liberties with doing so because you're used to not being able to do that. And then vice versa, if you have a trailer or cut a movie, you're not going to have like the wonderful pauses and the moments to let the audience member either figure something out or absorb something that just happened and feel the emotion that you're supposed to feel from a movie. I don't know what the original question was, but I know if there's
whatever it was, we're going somewhere even better because I love this conversation. I want to keep going because I think this idea of the internal metronome is such an important part of going back to where we started, which is understanding the language of trailer editing versus short form versus long form versus commercials versus music videos, and goes back to this idea of as editors, we can move around, but we can't just assume because I'm a storyteller, I can cut anything. It drives me crazy when editors say this. It drives me just as crazy when a producer or director says, oh, well, you just do short form, you can't do long form. I've been told that crap my entire career. But when editors say, well, I can do anything, that's not true. And that internal metronome is such an important part of the conversation because I've seen it from both sides as well. When I was in trailers, I was hired to do a pitch reel, which was essentially a 3 to 4 minute extended trailer, plus cutting 2 scenes of an indie feature so they could shop it around town in the studios. They loved the sizzle. It was like a 4 minute extended trailer. 4 minutes sounds really long, but you're supposed to tell more of the story when you're pitching. And then they had me cut the 2 scenes. And they're like, the cuts are good, but you need to slow down. You don't need to cut it like a trailer, let moments breathe, and you don't have to show every person's line on camera. And it was just me kind of having to recalibrate the way that I approach specific scenes and cuts and that language and that metronome. But then on the flip side, I have a friend of mine who is an Oscar-nominated A-list editor, worked on some of the biggest films on the planet. And this was years ago. They said, we're putting together kind of a sales reel, pitch reel. Can you take a look at my trailer? Unwatchable. I mean, it was unwatchably bad. And I really hope this person doesn't know who they are because I would never mention their name, but it was terrible. And I was scratching my head like, how is that possible? You work on things that I could only dream of cutting someday, but you can't cut a trailer to save your life. And it's 2 completely different storytelling skill sets.
And it's not that they couldn't eventually, it's that right then they couldn't. You have to kind of recalibrate yourself and you can't do it instantly. It's impossible. I mean, even within the advertising and trailer world, there's 15-second spots, there's 30-second spots, and there's people that do a lot more of the spots. And then there's people that do a lot more trailers and some people bounce between them. But man, if you've been cutting 15-second spots all day, that's a fire hose of information. And there is very little empty space in that timeline. And if you did a trailer, even at 2 and 30 minutes and 30 seconds, which we think of as fast compared to the film, that has to go way slower. So, I mean, it's like there's all different levels of calibration, but you could do it all, but you can't maybe do it in the same week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you need some time to get used to it.
Exactly. Yeah. So another thing that I've gone through both as just a fun exercise, but also a frustrating exercise is not only kind of playing with the story beats or kind of trying to cheat, but actually changing the genre of the film. So as an exercise, this was years ago. I think it was even before YouTube existed, or it was right when YouTube came out. My God, I sound old talking about this. But the studios were actually spending money to cut parody trailers. So I was hired at a major A-list trailer company to cut a horror version of The Sound of Music. Never made the light of day. I wish I could share it. I don't even have a copy of it anymore. But it was called what was it called? The Sound That Rocks the Cradle. So it was basically The Hand That Rocks the Cradle meets The Sound of Music, totally playing with genre conventions. It's one of the funnest things I've ever cut in my entire career. But I've also been asked legitimately by a studio, we want to make this more of this kind of a movie instead of this kind of a movie. So how has that experience worked for you where you're legitimately being told to skew the entire genre just for the sake of selling tickets?
Yeah. I didn't obviously cut this, but you reminded me of that. Have you seen the one on YouTube? It's Elf cut as a thriller.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. That's such a good example of that. I honestly was never really told to do anything that drastic. I'd say this sounds so silly, but sometimes you are told to cut a female-friendly version of something, particularly action, so that the girlfriend will say, "Fine, we'll go see whatever if the guy wants to see it." The funny thing is, you typically don't do male-friendly versions of romantic comedies, but that's probably the closest I've really done to that, where you've got whatever Mission Impossible 47, and you might choose music that's a little bit soft. I think it's silly because essentially it's assuming that women don't like action and they don't like fun, exciting stuff, which of course they do. So I always felt like it was kind of an exercise in futility, and you're just making something slightly more boring for, a woman that's like, well, I just want to watch an action movie anyway. What are we doing this for? Anyway, that's a tangent. But yeah, I've done some of that. And that's where like you try to get you feature the female character a little bit more. Maybe the music is a little bit softer. You lead into a joke that, testing audiences, again, back to that, might think is a little bit more relevant to women than men. It's usually a disaster because the movie isn't designed that way. But I've actually never cut something specifically massively changing the genres like that. I've seen people do it. That'd be a fun thing to do, but I haven't personally done it.
Well, the reason I bring some of this up and kind of the darker sides of the trailer world and having to change genres or all the things that are challenging are because I also believe whether somebody's listening right now that wants to be a trailer editor, not trying to dissuade anybody, or anybody that is in the trailer world that might be a little disenchanted or even burned out by it, there is no better film school for being a storyteller and learning how to solve problems than me being a trailer editor. I am so thankful that I spent years learning this craft because there have been so many times in the long form world that a challenge has come up that literally I'd share a wall with an Emmy-winning editor and they couldn't crack something because it really required an outside-the-box approach. Because of all the neural pathways that I have from being a trailer editor, I could look at it from a totally different perspective. Oh, I'll just shift this byte with this byte and flop this shot around and add this and that, do the music with this. And it's like, boom, done. The only reason that I can do all that is because of my experience in trailers. So even if somebody doesn't see trailers as the long haul, there's no better film school for being a great editor, I believe, than working in short form.
Yeah, agreed. It's a whole bag of tricks that you might not otherwise pick up and get access to. Agreed, for sure. There's never been more competition ever with anything than there is now. And that same statement will be true in 1 year and 10 years and 15 years, unless something crazy happens. But the cream always rises to the top. So there could be 1,000 people doing the same thing. We'll just do it really, really good.
Hey there. For tons more free editing training, head over to our website at filmeditingpro.com/free training. Here you can download free editing guides along with high-quality video training courses created by our team of professional Hollywood editors. Our tutorials cover a wide range of editing topics, like cutting awesome movie trailers, editing action scenes, how to work with music and sound design, and a lot more. All of these free guides and videos are available at filmeditingpro.com/free training. I'll see you next time.